The air in the cell was cold. Captain June Park sat on the hard metal bench, his back straight despite his exhaustion. Through the shimmering blue energy barrier, he could see the stars streaking by as the massive ship traveled through space. 3 days had passed since his small explorer ship had been surrounded by the huge warships of the Nexus Empire. "You have violated Nexus space, human," the commander had told him over the communication system. His voice was cold and flat. "Surrender now, or be destroyed." June had no choice. His small ship, the Wanderer, was no match for even one of their warships. There were 5 surrounding him. He powered down his weapon systems, not that they would have done much good, and allowed the larger ship to pull him into its docking bay with a tractor beam. Now he sat in this cell, waiting. The Nexus Empire controlled 17 star systems, with hundreds of worlds. They had strict rules about where humans could and could not go. According to them, June had gone where humans were forbidden. What they did not know was that June Park was not just a simple explorer. Before he left Earth to seek adventure among the stars, he had been the youngest legal scholar at the Interstellar Diplomatic Academy. He knew more about the laws of alien civilizations than almost any other human. He had studied the Nexus Empire's legal system for years before walking away from his promising career. His friends had been shocked when he quit. "You're throwing away everything," his mentor had told him. "Your talent is being wasted." Maybe they were right. But Earth politics had become too corrupt, too focused on power rather than justice. So June had bought a small ship and left, seeking the freedom of the stars. He became a trader and explorer, traveling to distant worlds, meeting new species, and learning their ways. Until now, when he found himself captured by the most powerful empire in this part of the galaxy. The door to the corridor outside his cell slid open. A Nexan officer walked in, his silver-scaled skin reflecting the harsh lights. Lieutenant Hyun was tall, with the characteristic ridge of bone along his forehead that marked all Nexans. His uniform was black with silver trim, displaying his rank and unit human. Hyun said, his voice flat and emotionless. "We approach Nexus Prime. You will be presented to the Imperial Tribunal upon arrival." June stood up slowly. "The Imperial Tribunal? Not just a military court?" Hyun's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your crimes warrant the highest judgment. The tribunal will decide your punishment." "What exactly am I charged with?" June asked, keeping his voice calm. "Violation of sovereign space," Hyun began. "Possession of forbidden technology, and suspected espionage against the Empire." June almost smiled. These charges were serious and completely false. His ship had entered an area that, according to the Treaty of Solaran Boundaries, was open to human vessels. His technology was standard for human ships and well within the permitted limits, and he certainly wasn't a spy. "The tribunal has never acquitted a non-Nexan in its 3,000 years of existence," Hyun added, watching June's face for signs of fear. Instead, June nodded thoughtfully. "Will I be allowed to speak in my own defense?" The question seemed to surprise the Nexan officer. "You will be given the standard opportunity to confess your crimes and beg for mercy," he said. "This is the tradition for all non-Nexans brought before the tribunal." "Just to be clear," June said carefully, "I will be permitted to address the tribunal directly." "Yes," Hyun replied, confused by the human's apparent lack of fear. "Though it will change nothing. The judgment is almost certain." June smiled slightly. "That's all I need." The officer stared at him for a long moment, trying to understand why this human seemed so calm when facing such serious charges. All other aliens brought before the tribunal had shown fear, had begged and pleaded. This one seemed almost confident. "Your attitude is unusual," Hyun observed. June shrugged. "I've found that justice shows itself in unexpected ways, Lieutenant." "Justice?" Hyun repeated the word as if it were foreign to him. "The Empire determines justice." "Does it?" June asked quietly. "Or does justice exist independent of power?" The Nexan did not reply, but June could see confusion in his silver eyes. Such questions were not common in the Empire, where the word of the Empress was law and questioning was discouraged. Through the small window in his cell, June could see they were approaching a planet. It grew larger, a swirling blue-green world with 3 small moons. Nexus Prime, the heart of the Empire. He had studied maps of it, read descriptions, but had never expected to see it firsthand, certainly not as a prisoner. "We will arrive in 1 hour," Hyun said. "You will be provided appropriate clothing for your appearance before the tribunal." "Thank you," June replied politely. As the officer turned to leave, June spoke again. "Lieutenant, may I ask something?" Hyun paused, then nodded once. "Have you ever questioned the laws you enforce?" The Nexan's face became even more rigid. "The laws of the Empire bring order to the chaos of the galaxy. They are not to be questioned. Even when they might be wrong?" "The Empire is not wrong," Hyun said automatically, but there was the slightest hesitation in his voice. "Everything that exists can be improved, Lieutenant," June said gently. "Even great empires." Hyun left without another word, but his steps were less confident than when he had entered. Alone again, June turned back to the window. The planet was beautiful, with vast oceans and sprawling cities that glittered even from space. Soon he would stand before the feared Imperial Tribunal, where no non-Nexan had ever received justice. He thought about the articles of Nexan law he had memorized years ago, the historical precedents he had studied, the contradictions he had discovered in their legal codes, knowledge that had seemed useless when he abandoned his career, but now might save his life. More importantly, it might change an empire. June Park smiled as the great ship began its descent toward Nexus Prime. The tribunal expected a frightened human begging for mercy. Instead, they would find something they had never faced before, a human who knew their laws better than they did themselves. "Time to teach an empire what justice really means," he whispered to himself as the planet grew larger in the window, its 3 moons hanging like silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. The greatest challenge of his life was about to begin. And despite everything, despite the danger and the uncertainty, June felt more alive than he had in years. The game was about to start, and he held cards the Empire didn't even know existed. The Imperial Tribunal chamber was enormous. June Park stood in the center, a small figure on a circular platform. Above him, the ceiling rose hundreds of meters, ending in a massive crystal dome. Through it, he could see the 3 moons of Nexus, Prime hanging in the purple-black sky. 9 judges, the ascended arbiters of the Nexus Empire, sat on floating platforms of black stone. Their silver-scaled faces showed no emotion beneath their ornate helmets. The helmets were decorated with symbols of their rank and history, some dating back thousands of years. Around the central area where June stood, thousands of Nexans filled the circular gallery. They had come to watch the trial. Most had never seen a human before. They whispered among themselves, pointing at his smooth skin and round eyes, so different from their own scaled bodies and vertical pupils. June noticed a special balcony above the judges. A single figure sat there, surrounded by guards in gleaming armor. Even from a distance, he could see the crown-like structure on her head. Empress Suk herself had come to watch his trial. This was unusual. The ruler of 17 star systems rarely attended tribunal hearings. Lieutenant Hyun stood to one side of June, making sure he did not try to escape. Though where would he go? The entire planet was controlled by the Empire. The chief arbiter, Elder Day, raised his hand. The room fell silent immediately. "Human June Park," Elder Day said, his voice deep and formal. He spoke in High Nexan, the formal language of the court. "You stand accused of crimes against the sovereign empire of Nexus. How do you respond?" June had been given a translation device that hung around his neck. It converted the elder's words to human language. It would also translate June's words into perfect High Nexan when he spoke. This was the moment. Normally, accused aliens would beg for mercy or try to explain that their crimes were accidents. The tribunal expected this from June. Instead, he asked calmly, "May I inquire about the foundational principles of Nexan justice?" The question echoed through the chamber. Murmurs of surprise rose from the audience. This was not the response anyone had expected. Elder Day blinked slowly, his vertical pupils narrowing. He looked at the other arbiters, who seemed equally surprised. "You wish to know our principles of justice?" Elder Day asked, his voice showing confusion. "For what purpose?" "To understand the standards by which I will be judged," June replied, simply. The elder was silent for a moment. Then, perhaps deciding there was no harm in answering, he spoke in formal tones. "The three pillars of Nexan justice are truth above deception, order above chaos, collective welfare above individual gain." June nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Elder. With the Tribunal's permission, I wish to defend myself according to these principles, using only your own laws and historical precedents." This request caused even more murmurs among the crowd. Elder Day leaned forward, his interest clearly sparked. "You claim knowledge of our laws, human?" "I have studied them." "Yes," June said. "Before becoming an explorer, I was a scholar of interstellar legal systems." The 9 arbiters turned to each other, speaking in low voices. June waited patiently. He could see Lieutenant Hune staring at him with new curiosity. Finally, Elder Day turned back to June. "This is most unusual. Non-Nexans rarely study our legal codes." "Perhaps they should," June suggested politely. A sound very much like laughter came from the Imperial balcony. Empress Suk was watching with clear interest now. "Very well," Elder Day decided. "You may defend yourself using our laws and precedents. Minister Tay will present the case against you." A tall Nexan in dark robes stepped forward. His scales were darker than most, almost black in places. His eyes were sharp and cold as he looked at June. "The charges are serious, human," Minister Tay said. "First, you entered the Solaran Expanse, an area forbidden to your kind. May I see the exact borders defined in the Treaty of Solaran Boundaries?" June asked immediately. Minister Tay paused, surprised. "You wish to see the treaty?" "Yes," June said. "If I am to defend myself properly, I need to see the exact legal definition of the area I supposedly entered illegally." Elder Day nodded slowly. "A reasonable request. Bring up the Treaty of Solaran Boundaries." A large holographic display appeared. In the center of the chamber, it showed a map of space with borders marked in different colors. "As you can see," Minister Tay said, pointing to a red area, "your ship was detected here, clearly within the Forbidden Zone." June stepped closer to the map. "May I also see the coordinates where my ship was actually detected?" Another spot appeared on the map, marked with a blinking light. June smiled slightly. "Thank you. Now, may I request access to the 7th Amendment of the treaty, made 53 standard years ago?" Minister Tay looked confused. "What amendment?" "The 7th Amendment to the treaty signed by Empress Suk's father, which adjusted the borders in that exact sector," June explained. The chamber went very quiet. June could see the arbiters looking at each other with concern. They had not expected this human to know about an amendment that many of their own people had forgotten. Elder Day's voice was careful as he said, "Bring up the 7th Amendment." The map changed. The borders shifted slightly. Now the blinking dot that showed June's ship was clearly outside the red Forbidden Zone. "As you can see," June said calmly, "according to your own treaty, my ship was in permitted space when it was intercepted." Minister Tay's scales darkened in what June recognized as the Nexan equivalent of a flush of anger or embarrassment. This is a minor technical point," he stammered. "The second charge remains possession of forbidden technology." "What technology specifically?" June asked. "Your ship contained quantum encryption devices forbidden under Section 12 of the Technology Control Act," Minister Tay declared. June nodded. "May I see Section 12, please?" The holographic display changed again, showing dense legal text. "Please direct your attention to subsection 47 Alpha," June said. The text scrolled and highlighted a particular paragraph. June read aloud. "Non-military. Vessels under 500 tons displacement are permitted standard communication security measures, including basic quantum encryption for personal communications." He turned to the tribunal. My ship, the Wanderer, weighs 320 tons. The encryption system is standard for human civilian vessels. According to your own law, it is explicitly permitted. Elder Day's eyes had narrowed to thin slits. The human appears to have studied our laws extensively. I respect them, Elder, June said with a slight bow. As you stated, truth above deception. The crowd was completely silent now. Even Minister Tay seemed at a loss for words. From her balcony, Empress Sook leaned forward, watching June with undisguised interest. The third charge, Minister Tay finally continued, his voice less confident now, is suspected espionage against the Empire. What evidence supports this charge? June asked. Your presence in a sensitive area, with technology capable of scanning our defense systems. But we've established I was not in a forbidden area, June interrupted gently. And my ship's sensors are standard equipment. If I may direct the Tribunal's attention to Article 12 of the Declaration of Imperial Ascendancy. Minister Tay looked to Elder Day, who nodded reluctantly. The holographic display changed again, showing an ancient document. This declaration was signed by Empress Sook's revered ancestor, June explained. Article 12 states, the Empire embraces knowledge seekers who approach with open transmissions and unarmed vessels. He turned to the tribunal. My logs will confirm that my communications were open and unencrypted when your ships approached. My weapon systems were powered down. According to your own founding document, I was acting as a legitimate knowledge seeker, not a spy. The chamber erupted in whispers. Elder Day called for silence. This hearing will adjourn for 1 hour, he declared. The arbiters must discuss these unexpected developments. As the arbiters floated away on their platforms, June caught Lieutenant Hyun looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it respect? Concern? Perhaps both. You knew, Hyun said quietly. You knew our laws all along. June smiled slightly. Knowledge is the best defense, Lieutenant, especially when facing an empire. The tribunal has never faced someone like you before, Hyun admitted. Perhaps it's time they did, June replied. After all, your second pillar is order above chaos. What could be more orderly than following your own laws exactly as they are written? Hyun had no answer for that. When the tribunal returned after the 1-hour break, the mood in the chamber had changed. The audience was no longer just curious, they were excited. News of the human who challenged the tribunal with their own laws had spread quickly through Nexus Prime. June stood calmly on his platform as the 9 arbiters took their places. He noticed that they now had data tablets before them. They were preparing for a real legal challenge, something they had not expected to face. Elder Day spoke first. The tribunal will continue with the case of human June Park. Minister Tay, you may proceed with your case. Minister Tay looked less confident than before. The Empire maintains that despite technical aspects of the law the human has pointed out, his presence near Nexus space represents a clear threat. June waited for a specific charge. When none came, he spoke. Honorable arbiters, I must ask, am I now being accused of being a threat simply because I am human? Elder Day's eyes narrowed. Explain your question. If no specific law was broken, June said, then my detention appears to be based solely on my species. Does Nexan law permit detention without specific charges? The chamber went quiet. This was a direct challenge to the entire system. I refer the tribunal to the Rights of Sentient Beings Act, passed during the reign of Empress Sook's grandfather, June continued. Section 3 states clearly that no sentient being may be detained without specific violation of codified law. Another document appeared on the large holographic display. The text matched what June had quoted exactly. The human is correct, one of the other arbiters said. It was the first time any arbiter besides Elder Day had spoken. His name was Arbiter Jin, younger than the others. The Rights Act does indeed forbid detention without specific charges. Minister Tay looked flustered. The charges were clearly stated: violation of sovereign space, possession of forbidden technology, and espionage. And we have addressed each charge with specific legal references showing no laws were broken. June replied calmly. Unless new charges are presented. The Rights Act requires my immediate release. The tribunal chamber erupted in murmurs again. Elder Day called for silence. The ministry wishes to present a new charge, Minister Tay said quickly. Interference with Imperial patrol vessels. June tilted his head. May I ask what interference occurred? Your ship's presence required our patrol to divert from its regular course, thus interfering with Imperial operations. June nodded thoughtfully. I see. May I request access to the Imperial Naval Code regarding civilian encounters? Elder Day hesitated, then nodded. The holographic display changed again. June scanned the text quickly. Section 89C states, Imperial vessels encountering civilian craft in unclaimed or non-restricted space shall provide safe passage and assistance if requested. As we established earlier, my ship was in non-restricted space according to the 7th Amendment. Your patrol ships approached me, not the reverse. Minister Tay's scales were darkening again. This human twists our laws against us. Respectfully, Minister, June said, I am merely reading your laws as they are written. If applying your laws exactly as written seems like twisting, perhaps, the issue is not with me but with laws that do not actually say what you wish they said. A sound very much like laughter came from the Imperial balcony again. Empress Sook was clearly enjoying the spectacle. Elder Day seemed less amused. Human, you test the patience of this tribunal. Elder, June replied respectfully. Your second pillar is order above chaos. Yet is there not chaos an inconsistent application of law? When rules bend according to the species of the accused, is that not the definition of disorder? The chamber went completely silent. No one had ever spoken to the tribunal this way before. One of the female arbiters, Elder Sun, leaned forward. The human makes an interesting point, Elder Day. Our own legal philosophy demands consistency. June noticed tension between the arbiters. Some seemed impressed by his arguments, while others appeared angry at the challenge to their authority. Would like to present evidence, June said, that may help the tribunal understand my perspective. What evidence? Elder Day asked suspiciously. If I may be permitted access to the Imperial records of ship movements for the past standard year? The request was bold. Such records were not normally shared with outsiders. Elder Jin spoke again. I support this request. If we are to judge fairly, we must examine all relevant evidence. Elder Day looked displeased but nodded slowly. Access granted. But be warned, human misuse of such information carries severe penalties. The holographic CA display changed to show a massive database of ship movements throughout Nexus space and beyond. Thank you, June said. Computer, please display all instances of non-Nexan ships that entered the same sector where my ship was detained within the past standard year. The display changed, showing 17 different incidents. 17 times when non-Nexan ships had entered that exact area. None had been detained. As you can see, June said quietly, 17 vessels from 5 different species entered the exact same area. None were detained or charged. May I ask why my ship was treated differently? Minister Tay stammered. Those were all ships from allied worlds. Is there a specific law that states humans cannot enter areas that other allied species may enter? June asked. If so, I would like to see it. The minister had no answer. From the audience, June could hear people talking excitedly. This was unlike any trial they had ever witnessed. The human was not just defending himself, he was questioning the entire system. Empress Sook raised her hand slightly. An aide approached her, listened, then hurried down to speak to Elder Day. The elder's eyes widened in surprise. The tribunal will take a short recess, Elder Day announced. Human June Park, Empress Sook wishes to speak with you privately. The audience gasped. This was unprecedented. The Empress never spoke directly with accused criminals. Lieutenant Hyun looked shocked as he escorted June from the platform. This has never happened before, he whispered. No one under trial has ever been granted an audience with the Empress. There's a first time for everything, Lieutenant, June replied calmly, though his heart was racing. They were led through long corridors of polished stone to a small meeting room. The walls were decorated with ancient star maps and historical documents. June recognized some of them, important treaties and declarations from Nexan history. The door opened, and Empress Suk entered. In person, she was tall and regal. Her silver scales so fine they almost looked like silk. The crown-like structure on her head was actually part of her body, a sign of royal blood among Nexans. Lieutenant Hyun immediately dropped to one knee. June remained standing but bowed respectfully. "Leave us," the Empress said to Hyun. The lieutenant hesitated, then left the room quickly. Empress Suk studied June carefully. "You are not what I expected, human." "What did you expect, Your Majesty?" June asked. "Fear, pleading, the usual behavior of those who face our tribunal." She moved to a window that overlooked the city. "Instead, you turn our laws against us with impressive skill." "Not against you, Your Majesty," June corrected gently. "I merely ask that they be applied fairly and consistently." "That is not a challenge to your authority. It is a validation of it. A truly powerful empire has no need to bend its own rules." The Empress turned back to him, her vertical pupils widening slightly. "Interesting perspective. Tell me, what outcome do you seek from this trial?" June considered his answer carefully. "Justice first for myself, but beyond that, perhaps a chance for humans and the Nexus Empire to find a better way forward. Our peoples need not be adversaries." "You believe one trial can change the relationship between our civilizations?" she asked, sounding skeptical. "Great changes often begin with small moments, Your Majesty," June replied. "This could be such a moment." The Empress was silent for a long while, then she nodded slightly. "Return to the tribunal, human. Finish what you have begun. I will be watching with great interest." As Lieutenant Hyun led him back to the chamber, June knew that the real test was still to come. He had challenged the tribunal's unfairness. Now he needed to show them a better way forward. The fate of future relations between humans and the Nexus Empire might depend on what happened next. By the beginning of the second day, the Imperial Tribunal chamber was packed beyond capacity. Citizens from all across Nexus Prime had come to watch. The trial was being broadcast to all 17 worlds of the Empire. What had started as a simple case against a human had become something unprecedented, a challenge to the very foundations of imperial justice. June returned to his platform in the center of the chamber. He had been given quarters for the night rather than being returned to a cell, another sign that his status had changed. Elder Day called the session to order. "The tribunal will continue with the case of human June Park. Before we proceed, the tribunal has reviewed the evidence presented yesterday. We acknowledge that the location where the human's ship was detained was not, according to the Seventh Amendment, in forbidden space." Murmurs spread through the audience. The tribunal rarely admitted errors. "However," Elder Day continued, "the charges of possessing forbidden technology and suspected espionage remain." June nodded respectfully. "Thank you for acknowledging the spatial jurisdiction issue, Elder. May I continue my defense on the remaining charges?" "You may proceed," Elder Day said. June turned to the holographic display. "I would like to request access to the records of all registered human ships in Nexan databases." The display changed to show a list of human vessels known to the Empire. "Computer, please highlight all human vessels that use the same level of quantum encryption as my ship, the Wanderer," June requested. Nearly every ship on the list was highlighted. "As you can see, the encryption system on my vessel is standard for human ships. According to subsection 47 Alpha of the Technology Control Act, which we reviewed yesterday, this level of encryption is permitted for non-military vessels under 500 tons. Minister Tay stepped forward. "The law may permit the technology, but the human's use of it in proximity to our security systems suggests hostile intent." "That brings us to the espionage charge," June replied calmly. "May I request access to records of all diplomatic communications between the Nexus Empire and the Human Alliance over the past 5 years?" This request caused even more murmurs. Elder Day looked to the Imperial balcony, where Empress Suk sat watching. She gave a small nod. "Access granted," Elder Day said. though he sounded reluctant. The display showed hundreds of official communications between the two governments. Computer, please display diplomatic note Ni-He 2371, sent from the Human Alliance to the Nexus Empire 2 years ago, June said. A specific document appeared on screen. This is a formal notification that human scientific vessels would be conducting deep space surveys in neutral zones adjacent to Nexan space, including the area where my ship was detained. The note specifically states that these missions are scientific in nature and poses no threat to the Empire. June turned to face the Tribunal directly. The Empire acknowledged receipt of this notification and raised no objections. My ship's logs, which were confiscated when I was detained, will confirm that I was conducting exactly this type of survey when I was arrested. Several of the arbiters were now reviewing data on their tablets, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The human has a point, said Elder Son. The diplomatic records show we did receive this notification. Minister Tay looked furious. Regardless of notifications, the human's actions were completely in line with both human and Nexan law, June interrupted firmly. I followed every regulation. I maintained open communications. My weapon systems were powered down. I was exactly where I was permitted to be, doing exactly what had been previously announced. He paused, then continued more softly. Honorable arbiters, I must ask, what law did I actually break? The chamber was completely silent. Even Minister Tay seemed at a loss for words. I propose a challenge, June said, his voice clear and confident. Allow me to present evidence that the Empire itself has violated the very laws it accuses me of breaking, 17 times in the past standard year alone. The audience gasped. Elder Day's scales darkened with anger. You dare accuse the Empire of law-breaking? He asked, his voice cold. I dare to suggest that consistency in law applies to all, even the most powerful, June replied. Is that not the meaning of your own principle? Order above chaos? From her balcony, Empress Sook leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. She made a small gesture to Elder Day. The elder appeared to struggle with himself before finally saying, Present your evidence, human. Thank you, June said. Computer, please display records of Imperial vessels entering Human Alliance territory in the past standard year. The holographic display changed to show numerous instances where Nexan ships had crossed into human space. As you can see, Imperial vessels entered human territory 23 times. In each case, the Human Alliance chose to address these incursions through diplomatic channels rather than by detaining crew members or seizing ships. June turned to face the audience as well as the Tribunal. I do not point this out to accuse the Empire of wrongdoing, but to demonstrate that there are better ways to handle such situations than immediate detention and criminal charges. Elder Jin, the younger arbiter who had supported June earlier, spoke up. The human makes a valid point. Our own records confirm these incidents. Yet the Human Alliance did not respond with force or detention. Because that is not justice, June said quietly. Justice is not about power. It is not about enforcing rules against some while exempting others. True justice is consistent, fair, and applies equally to all, whether they are a lone human in a small ship or a mighty empire spanning 17 worlds. The chamber erupted in discussion. Citizens were talking excitedly among themselves. The arbiters conferred urgently on their platforms. Minister Tay looked ready to explode with frustration. Elder Day raised his hand for silence. This tribunal has never faced such arguments before. Perhaps it should have, Elder, June suggested gently. Perhaps all legal systems need to be challenged occasionally to ensure they remain just. Lieutenant Hyun, still standing guard near June, whispered, You are changing things. Already there are discussions throughout the city about your case. Good, June replied softly. Change begins with discussion. Elder Day spoke formally. The tribunal will adjourn until tomorrow morning to consider these unusual arguments. As the chamber began to empty, a young Nexan approached the edge of the platform where June stood. Guards moved to intercept her, but she called out, Is it true that humans would not have detained our people if they entered your space? June looked at her directly. It is true. We believe in communication before confrontation. Why? She asked, genuinely curious. Because we have learned through bitter experience that misunderstandings are often the root of conflict, June explained. When you assume hostile intent without evidence, you often create the very hostility you feared. The guards finally led the young Nexan away, but June could see that many others had heard his words. Seeds of a new idea were being planted. Lieutenant Hyun escorted him back to his quarters. The officer seemed troubled. What is it, Lieutenant? June asked. I have served the Empire faithfully for many years, Hyun said slowly. I have never questioned our ways. But your words make me wonder if our justice is truly just. June nodded. That questioning is valuable, Lieutenant. The strongest societies are those that can examine themselves honestly and grow from what they learn. The tribunal may still rule against you, Hyun warned. Perhaps, June agreed, but they cannot unhear what has been said. Neither can those who watched. Ideas once spoken have a life of their own. Looking out the window at the gleaming towers of Nexus Prime, June knew that whatever happened tomorrow, something important had already begun. A single human, armed with nothing but knowledge and conviction, had challenged an empire's understanding of justice itself. The final test would come tomorrow. On the final day of the trial, the Imperial Tribunal chamber could not hold all who wanted to attend. Crowds gathered in the public squares of Nexus Prime, watching on large screens. Throughout the 17 worlds of the Empire, billions of Nexans were following the case of the single human who had challenged their entire concept of justice. June Park stood once more on the central platform. He had slept little the night before, preparing for this final day. Whatever happened, he knew this was his last chance to make a difference. The 9 arbiters took their places, their expressions unreadable. Elder Day called the session to order. Before final statements are made, Elder Day announced, the tribunal has reviewed all evidence presented in this case. We have examined the relevant laws and precedents cited by the human June Park. The chamber was completely silent, everyone waiting for the elder's next words. The tribunal acknowledges that according to the strict letter of our laws, the human did not violate the spatial boundaries as defined in the 7th Amendment to the Treaty of Solaran Boundaries. We further acknowledge that his technology was within permitted limits for vessels of his ship's class. Murmurs of surprise spread through the audience. The tribunal was admitting that 2 of the 3 charges were invalid. Regarding the charge of espionage, Elder Day continued, we find insufficient evidence to support this claim in light of the diplomatic notifications previously submitted by the Human Alliance. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Was the tribunal about to do the unthinkable, acquit a non-Nexan? Elder Day raised his hand for silence. However, before we render our final decision, the human may make a closing statement. June nodded respectfully. Thank you, Elder Day. He turned slowly, looking at the thousands of Nexans in the chamber, aware of the billions more watching across the stars. Honorable arbiters, Empress Suk, citizens of the Nexus Empire, he began. Your third pillar states collective welfare above individual gain. So I ask you, what collective benefits from injustice? What empire prospers through inconsistency? The chamber was completely silent now. I stand before you not just as one human, but as a representative of a principle that spans the stars, the principle that true justice must be consistent, fair, and applied equally to all beings regardless of their species or power. June gestured to the great holographic display. May I show one final set of records? Elder Day nodded. Computer, please display incidents where conflicts between the Nexus, Empire, and other species were resolved through diplomatic means rather than detention or force. The display showed dozens of examples, peaceful resolutions to potential conflicts throughout the Empire's history. As you can see, June said, the greatest achievements of the Nexus Empire have not come through force or rigid application of power, but through wisdom, communication, and fairness. These are the moments that truly built your 17-world civilization. He turned back to the tribunal. Humanity does not seek conflict with the Nexus Empire. We seek exchange, understanding, and mutual respect. True justice acknowledges when laws require re-examination, not to weaken them, but to strengthen them. June's voice grew stronger, filling the chamber. An empire that can admit error is not weakened. It is strengthened. An empire that can evolve its understanding of justice doesn't diminish. It ascends. He looked up at the imperial balcony where Empress Suk sat watching intently. The greatest power is not in never changing, but in changing when change is needed. The strongest laws are those that serve all beings fairly. The chamber remained silent as June concluded, "I ask not for special treatment, but for the consistent application of your own laws and principles. That is all any being in this vast galaxy can ask for, and all that any truly just system should provide." As June finished speaking, the chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, from somewhere in the audience, a single Nexan began to clap their hands together, a human gesture of approval that had not been used in the Empire before. Slowly, others joined until the sound filled the chamber. Elder Day called for order. The arbiters conferred among themselves, their conversation appearing intense. Finally, Elder Day spoke. "The Imperial Tribunal has reached its decision." The chamber fell silent again. In the case of human June Park, all charges are dismissed. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the chamber erupted in sound as the audience reacted to the unprecedented decision. Elder Day continued, "The human has proven through careful application of our own laws that no violations occurred. To rule otherwise would contradict our own principles of justice." As the noise began to subside, something even more unexpected happened. Empress Suk herself stood and raised her hand. Immediately, absolute silence fell. "The tribunal has made its decision according to law," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "But I, as Empress, must consider the wider implications of this case." She looked directly at June. "Human June Park has shown us something that perhaps we needed to see. That our application of justice has not always been consistent or fair to non-Nexans. This realization does not weaken our empire. As the human rightly said, it strengthens us." The Empress's next words stunned everyone. "I hereby appoint June Park as Special Advisor on Interspecies Justice Reform. A complete review of our legal system will begin immediately, with the goal of ensuring that our laws are applied fairly to all beings who interact with our empire." The announcement caused a sensation throughout the chamber, and no doubt across all 17 worlds. Nothing like this had ever happened before. As the session ended, June found himself surrounded by Nexans wanting to speak with him. Lieutenant Hyun, who had guarded him since his arrest, approached with a completely different attitude than when they had first met. "You knew," Hyun said quietly. "From the moment you were arrested, you saw this outcome." June smiled. "Not this exact outcome, no. I simply believed that even an empire of stars must eventually face the most powerful force in the universe." "Which is?" Hyun asked. "An idea whose time has come," June replied. "For the Nexus Empire, that idea is equal justice, regardless of species, origin, or status. Once truly seen, it cannot be unseen." In the days that followed, June began his work with the Empire's legal scholars. The Park Protocols, as they came to be known, would transform not just the Nexus Empire, but eventually relations between all sentient species. Messages arrived from Earth, expressing shock and then delight at what their wayward legal scholar had accomplished. The Human Alliance immediately upgraded diplomatic relations with the Empire, beginning a new era of cooperation. 6 months later, as June stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city, Empress Suk joined him. "Your reforms have changed us," she said. "There was resistance at first, but even the most traditional Nexans now see the benefits of consistent justice." "Change is never easy," June acknowledged. "But sometimes it's necessary." "Will you return to Earth now?" she asked. June looked out at the city, where humans and Nexans now walked together freely. "Not yet. There's still work to be done here. And after that?" He smiled. There are many star empires in this galaxy. Perhaps others might benefit from reconsidering their approach to justice as well. The Empress made the soft sound that was the Nexan equivalent of laughter. One human changing the galaxy, one legal system at a time? Why not? June replied. After all, the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a battleship or a ray gun. It's an idea, the Empress finished for him. Exactly, June said, looking up at the stars. And the best ideas, like justice, fairness, and respect, belong to no single species. They belong to us all. And so a single human, armed with nothing but knowledge and conviction, changed not just an empire, but began a transformation that would span the stars, proving that the mightiest force in the universe was indeed an idea whose time had come.